All right, it's time for our last but not least panel discussion, led by my dear colleague Melissa Chin. And today we have in the room Will Cook. He's with Colonial Parking and manages parking in Washington, D.C. Just like Benito, Pérez, we'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves as well. We have Tom Woznick, Tobias Marx, and Scott Burton. And yeah, it's unfortunately Mary Catherine had other commitments today that came up last minute, so she won't be joining the room. Let's see if we have everybody in the room. So Scott, Benito, Tobias, Tom, and Will.
Hello, how are you?
While we're waiting for everybody to join, let's talk a little bit about the format of what's happening today. So we will have a mixture of polls and questions and statements. So our audience is free to vote. For each section, we will have a 10-minute slot. So, gentlemen, there are a fair number of you today, which we're very thankful for. So it would be nice if everybody could, we could hear from everyone today. Who are we missing? I think we are just missing Benito right now. Are you there, Benito?
Just trying to get my webcam right.
No problem.
Great. And I'm unfortunately not able to turn on my webcam because it's too many webcams, but I do want to take a quick opportunity to thank Brad Galvin and Lester Mascon for connecting us to some of the people in the room, and also a special thank you to Will and Benito for connecting us to other panelists, and we really very much appreciate you guys for being here today. So that was it.
Great. So how about we start with an introductory round? Maybe we can kick off with you, Will.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. Just glad to be here. Thank you very much, Steph and Melissa. Colonial Parking's in Washington, D.C. We have about 280 locations, all within about 20 miles of the White House. We service everything from large stadiums to shopping centers, Class A office buildings to surface lots, small surface lots. So we've seen in the past few months our business change demonstrably and in every area. So I'm glad to be joining the panel, and thanks for having me.
Perfect. Tom, perhaps you'd like to go next.
Sure. Greetings. Good afternoon. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be involved. I manage all parking services for the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the largest city in the state of Wisconsin. That includes regulations throughout the city. We have regulations for at all times anywhere throughout our city, including permits required during night parking from 2 to 6 a.m. We have a metered system of about 7,000 spaces. We own 5 parking structures with about 4,000 spaces. And then we help and manage all, not only parking services related, but also many transportation services related activities in the city.
Perfect. Scott, take it away, please.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Scott Burton. I'm with the City and County of Denver, and I assist our Curbside and Parking group with managing a lot of our on-street facilities, so our on-street assets, our meters, our valet, our loading zones, our time-limited areas, our parking permit programs, and we also have an off-street component. We have about 6 garages, I believe, that the City of Denver manages, but I work primarily on the on-street side of things.
Great. Thank you. Tobias?
Yeah, great to be here. I'm the Parking Services Division Manager for the City of Bend in Central Oregon. Fairly new to the role for the last 6 months here, moved here from the East Coast, where I was a parking director in Lowell, Massachusetts. Here in Bend, it's a lot changes right now. So we have a small on-street system in the downtown core with the downtown district. We're in the process of establishing residential benefit districts. So within that role, I manage all the on and off-street portfolio that we have, plus the permit system, plus enforcement. And we recently transitioned from a streets and operations department into a transportation and mobility department. And so until we fill the role of the mobility manager, we are like experimenting a little bit into the new mobility programs as well, which is quite interesting right now.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Benito, please.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Benito Pérez. I'm the Curbside Management Operations Planning Manager with the District Department of Transportation in Washington, D.C. We're mainly an on-street program because our wonderful partners are the Washington Parking Association, which William Cook is a part of, help provide us support on the off-street side. But on the on-street side, we manage a 20,000 meter space system on the meter side, and of course our residential and all our other curbside, which ranges up to about 250,000 parking spaces. We're just finishing up our census on what we have on the curbside. But we've been rethinking how we manage our curbside, and I'm sure we'll delve into that a little further, moving away from the concept of vehicle storage to mobility management of people and goods here in the district. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So let's kick off with our first poll and see which question the audience are most interested for us to start discussing. If we could just begin the poll, please, Steph. Great. So the first question we have is about your experience so far. So the first question is, what has been the effect of COVID-19 on your municipality or city? What adaptations have you implemented? What have you learned so far? And any key highlights you think are beneficial for others? So we'll give it a couple of seconds and wait and see what the results are from our audience. It's looking pretty decisive right now, so let's have a look at the results.
Let's have a look. I see that there's still some votes coming in. So everybody in the audience, you can choose whatever you like and click submit, and we'll see what we're going to discuss. Let's check out the results. Ready?
Okay, so we have 56%. What adaptations have you implemented? So let's move to our panelists. And is there anybody dying to kick this off? No takers?
I can mention a couple.
I'm happy to
So
start.
Scott Burton here. I can mention a couple things that we've done.
Go for it. Thanks.
Sure. So when COVID-19 occurred and we essentially shut off all of our meters downtown and no one was going anywhere, but we still wanted to do what we could to support businesses and retail establishments, we created and installed a lot of temporary loading zones throughout downtown by bagging meters and just by putting very temporary signs in place to try to provide locations for delivery drivers and for pickup and whatnot, just doing whatever we could to try to keep the economy rolling to the extent that we were impactful. So that's what we've done immediately following COVID-19 and the shutdown, and then we're looking to expand that program a little bit more with something not quite permanent, but temporary through probably middle of October, roughly, where we're looking to provide businesses with opportunities to expand patios, to occupy parking lanes, to provide more room for restaurants to operate within the right-of-way where it's feasible and safe.
Great, thank you. I know that Benito was also wanting to add something.
I don't know if my mic got cut off, so I apologize. I was going to start from the beginning where, from day one, and this has been a lot of work, not only here in DC, but, a bunch of the peer cities, Scott, your city as well, thinking what did we did from day one, and a lot of quick action on repurposing our curbside to facilitate the curbside pickup, especially to support our restaurant businesses A lot of that stuff initially started out of Seattle and caught like wildfire amongst our peers to react and to support our retail. Then you have work, for example, coming out of like New York and also Seattle again on repurposing curbside, dedicating parking near hospitals, and providing dedicated permits for hospital staff, because some of those facilities, whether they're garage, I heard the last speaker talking about hospital parking, things like that, but repurposing their garages or surface lots for COVID testing. So then you had some providers that still needed access to the hospital, so repurposing nearby curbside to allow them access to those facilities. Where we're going today, the mayor of DC just announced a few hours ago that we are going to be lifting our stay-at-home order as of Friday, moving to phase 1. And later on this week, she'll be making more announcements about what our curbside plans will involve, and much akin to what Scott already alluded to. How do we repurpose more of our curbside to facilitate expanded outdoor dining, expanded sidewalks, because an issue here in the district and some of the older cities on the East Coast with narrow right-of-ways and narrow sidewalks. How do we leverage the limited public space that we do have in our corridors to allow wider sidewalks, outdoor dining, curbside, retail activity? We'll be looking to measure the level of activity and look to see going forward what will we just keep temporarily for a period of time, or what will remain permanent going forward. Because from our initial analysis that we've looked at, there's been a lot of changes in our behaviors. So one thing that we anticipate here in DC is an enhanced activity with our curbside on-demand delivery services. We don't anticipate that level of demand going away after this pandemic is over. It may taper down a little bit, but it's a new reality that we'll have to adjust going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's been very interesting to see the change from beginning of COVID to now. And Will, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I find it interesting, this voting, waiting for the question to come, is of great interest to listen to it. And we all have our hands ready to touch the buzzer. To answer the question about what adaptations have we implemented, we've adapted everything. And in some cases, we've adapted things twice because this incident or this event has changed just about everything in our business. I'm very interested to hear Benito. If everybody hasn't picked up Benito, or both Benito and I are in Washington. Benito's handling the curb, and we have probably the lion's share of the off-street parking. And so we watch very carefully what's happening on the street, and it's very important to us. And I think they watch us, and it's very interesting to see how this event will characterize things. Very specifically, PPE. We have employees. We have 400 employees out there right now that need to be taken care of. They need protection from the virus, and we need to support their efforts. We need to support the customers. So PPE and enhanced sanitation has been number one. We think that over time, self-park will become very important. So we're enhancing all of our self-park offerings. We're looking at contactless solutions as a part of sanitation, everything from propping a door in a facility to thinking about how many times a consumer needs to touch something is super important today. So what adaptations? It's everything. We've had to reinvent just about everything and are continuing the process. Thank you.
So I would like to echo like what Scott and Benito already said. Like we pretty much did the same thing. Within the first 2 days, we created drive-through curbside pickup zone for our businesses in our downtown core, which we also offer to anybody else outside the downtown district, where we like figured it's good to loop a couple of businesses together and give them that. We pretty much put our permit system on hold because we went to 0 from one day to the other. which we also expect to continue slightly like that, or needing to be changed, because I think for the city of Bend itself, our workforce has transitioned to telecommuting, and we maintain all of our services as much as we could, with 70%, maybe even 75% of our workforce now working from home. Majority of them working from like the downtown campus, having parking permits before. So that is changing across the board. We now are transitioning over from like those combined curbside pickup zones to individual pickup zones that we give to businesses. And those we issue temporarily, because we don't know when we're in phase 1, but we don't know when we go to phase 2. And so our parking inventory in the downtown core is very limited. So as we are exploring the ideas that others have mentioned about like how do we get to more open streets, it's a very interesting conversation, because our businesses are split half-half. Because yes, the restaurants want to go everywhere, but the retailer and the salons and the hairstylers don't want to lose their parking. So that is going to be a very interesting balance to keep in mind too. So.
And Tom, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so we also implemented what we call carryout zones, which are very similar to what you've already heard from the others. The other adaptation we made within the last month or so was a collaboration with the County of Milwaukee to create an active streets program, which was several additional miles of streets that are intended to be a shared use. So they promote bicycle and pedestrian use to allow the public and people in general to get out and utilize the streets for purposes to exercise and get out of the house and do other things that we all want people to do in a safe manner.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have anything else to add on this particular point about adaptations? How do you see it going forwards in the sort of coming weeks in the longer term? Is there a plan for this?
I think one challenge, hopefully you can hear me, one challenge, and I don't know if my colleagues have felt the same, has been having to react quickly, but also carefully. There's been a lot of pressure, get this done now, but then also how do you add the the equity lens, but the public safety lens. So that's a concern on our end, and I don't know what others' reaction has been to that as well with all these adaptations. Because normally some of these programs take months to prepare, and here we are having to do it like one day to the next.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think one concern we have here in Denver is as we look to close certain streets to provide restaurants with more space to operate, some of these streets might have car share spaces on street or valet zones or other things. So the challenge of moving these things around to try to accommodate them on adjacent blocks, but while still making them useful. So we're similar to what you said, Benito, in terms of the programs having to come through fruition pretty quickly. We've had to create something in a couple of days. And so just the challenge of implementing that while still trying to keep certain things in place that are on those blocks that are going to be impacted. So I'll be curious to see that, what's the demand for valet, what's the demand for car share and Uber and Lyft and those types of uses. Will people feel comfortable getting in, another person's vehicle, and will there be a lot of demand for that in the future? So just curious to see what things look like over the course of the summer.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on to our next poll, which is in fact a statement. So if we could just have that ready now. And Will, I hope you've got your trigger finger ready. Benito, this sort of feeds into what you just said about progress being made fast. So we have a new reality where impossible projects are now possible, innovative ideas are welcome, and progress is made fast. So the options are I agree, I disagree, or I'm not sure. Let's give it a few seconds and we will have the results. And let's move to the results now. So 67% of our audience agrees with that statement. So please, gentlemen, let's start with Tom.
Yeah, I think the first two parts of that are very much true. This is a unique and wonderful opportunity to implement projects in a variety of transportation and parking related initiatives that many of us have long opined and wondered are possible. And even if it's building the foundation to make those realities as soon as possible, that is a wonderful opportunity that we should take advantage of, and I believe the vast majority of us will. Similar to innovative ideas, that's something we talk about, we wonder about, we ponder about all the time, and these moments in time where we have the opportunity to do make such changes are great. The problem of that three-pronged approach is fast. So my organization only has a couple high-level administrative staff, so to make these types of progresses this quickly is quite challenging. But having said that, that's a challenge we look forward to, and it's something that we want to figure out the best way we can accomplish it with the somewhat limited resources we have to be able to do that.
Perfect. Tobias, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I think that for us it's really interesting because we have a very active innovations and strategic department with a very active CIO. So for us to talk about new projects and new innovations right now is like we're like everybody wants to hear the best idea, and everybody wants to hear because it's also cost reduction. So I had worked on a proposal to bringing in parking management software, which I hadn't planned on bringing in for next year, and that mainly out of the reason, to give a little bit more context there, that our parking management contractor who does our enforcement on the street, who does our permit sales on the street, uses a fairly outdated solution that we have a hard time integrating with and have access to. And so we had hoped that, okay, halfway through the next fiscal year, we can do that. Well, we hope to do that in the next 6 weeks. And so we have worked on a citation flow improvement. I don't know if you're on the East Coast, the whole and parking citation and appeal system is a bit more easier going than on the West Coast, like in Oregon, where you have a couple more older laws and courts involved in that. And we worked on an improvement project for that, which we now fast-tracked to have up live for July 1st with the new fiscal year, because we identified significant savings. So the appetite for projects and innovation is really, really good for my environment. So which is really fun too, because you can be creative and show this is what we want to do, and let's go for it.
Perfect. Will, did you agree with the result?
Oh, I have to agree. I have to agree with the statement. I think that I think once we're through this, right now, I don't think we're really through this yet, to where we really have a clean field of view as to how this will, which particular ideas will come, and which ones will be the solutions, if you will. I think there's going to be there's obviously a lot of economic waste that's occurred in this tragedy, really, slow tragedy. But once we're through this, we will have a new reality, and a lot of ideas that have been bubbling around in the public space, I think, will come to pass and will synchronize with the new reality. And I think the idea of curbside mobility, the idea of what to do with this, what to do with curbside space, how to best manage streets, shared mobility, all of these things will come back in some form and will make sense. We're doing things fast. Our issue becomes a matter of resources. This is both constraining income and constraining time. And as this happens, we have a few less resources to deal with, but even the resources will return ultimately. So I can't not agree. I can't not agree with the statement. Thank you.
Okay, we just lost Tobias. He's having some technical difficulty. He will be coming back to us soon. So Scott, I could see you nodding. Did you agree with everything that Will said?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that it is tragic, and I think trying to see the silver lining that it does give us an opportunity to experiment with a couple things that maybe we would have been uncomfortable with or required a lot of time to put in place in the past. And so just the idea of shared streets and allowing the curb lane to be used for different things, that's just being comfortable with that and experimenting with that and see how well it works or doesn't. Learning a lot from that with the idea that some of these programs that we're testing and piloting now, that some of them become permanent in the future. So that's exciting to see what things look like.
Great, thanks. Anything to add, Benito?
So I agree to an extent. It has opened up, more discussions and more welcoming from our leadership to look at innovations. For example, if we're talking about clearing, curbside space from vehicle storage to facilitate mobility management and wider sidewalks or curbside retail, there's going to be there's the short-term issues right now of trying to get everyone back together again. But then in the long term, how do we recapture that value of that curb access? So there's some ideas we're bouncing around in that arena. But the caution I throw here, and our team has been bouncing off of this, and DC is part of the Transportation for America Smart Cities Collaborative, and the peer cities, there's about 20 cities in that group. And there's been a lot of discussion about, the speed, but also trying not to compromise environmental justice concerns. In DC, a lot of our disadvantaged communities have been adversely impacted as a result of COVID-19. So yes, there's a lot of these great ideas, but we have to be cognizant of, is the solution something that we can share across the district in our case? So, for example, some plans we're looking at for, revisiting a curb, question came up, what about accessibility? We do have, about 10 to 12% of our population, probably need to fact check that, but we have a population that has mobility access needs. Did we account for them? Then contactless payment options, what about those that are bankless? Or not accessible to smartphones. So I'm going to throw the wrench here and just say, let's be cognizant of these environmental justice concerns. It's exciting to innovate and bring these opportunities, but let's not forget about those environmental justice concerns. Thank you.
Thanks.
Very good point, Benito. Thank you.
We still have a couple of minutes here. One of the statements actually that will not be featured here today, but that did come up yesterday, perhaps controversial, was the statement that mandatory government guidelines are impossible to implement in practice. And our audience, it was pretty much 50% agreed with that statement. Is that something that you all agree with? Or are there examples of specific government mandatory guidelines that you feel just won't work in practice?
That's not.
I mean, I'm going to take a chance as the non-governmental entity here to start it off from the perspective of that so far, as it relates to this incident, we've really not seen anything that's untoward. It's all done for the purpose of safety. Everything that's happened, restrictions have made sense to us, me in the business community, and so I wouldn't say that we've seen anything yet that's impractical.
Fair enough. Okay, we will move on to our next poll. It was a very controversial statement.
I'll tread into it a little bit.
Okay.
I think it goes back to my earlier statement about environmental justice. It's it's about voices in the conversation, and it's like, how do we balance those needs? And if we're not, it's balancing speed and balancing access for all those voices in the room. So it puts us in a tough position. So it's just something we're going to have to be careful of, because if someone's not getting the speed and the response that they're getting, then that opens up a risk of not complying with those recommendations that government's trying to push through. So adding back to the earlier conversation about speed and implementation and innovation, another risk.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you, Benito. Okay, let's move on swiftly to our next set of questions. So if we can run the poll now, please. So these questions are about managing people and intermediate measures. So the first option we have is, how have you communicated with your citizens? How have you made use, or have you made use of volunteers during this time? Did you temporarily relax enforcement? I know that a couple of you touched on that earlier. And how will you manage the bounce back after lockdown? This particular question refers to mental health and also job losses following COVID-19. So our audience is currently voting. Gents, have you got any guesses as to which one will be the question to be discussed next?
No clue.
No clue, none at all?
None, zero, no prediction.
No prediction. Okay, that's probably the safest, actually, given this situation at the moment where things are changing on a daily basis. Let's run the results and have a look. So 67%, that was pretty decisive. So perhaps, Will, would you like to kick us off with this one?
I just figured we get the question on mental health. This has certainly been a shock, having to sort of manage. In our case, we have about 1,000 employees, and we've had to shed positions due to economic requirements with our clients, for our clients, and on behalf of our clients, really. And so, our plan has been to over communicate with our employees who are either affected in this instance, both the employees who continue to work as well as the employees who are on layoff. We've had two paths of communications almost weekly. We've over communicated with our clients and customers, both customers who are continuing to park with us, as well as customers who haven't been parking with us, who have been at home, because we handle a lot of essential worker activity, and some of that has increased. So generally, increased employee engagement, and we've relaxed some of our business rules, and we've tried to keep in touch with our employees and recognize that this is a shock to people's system. My direct reports, it's a shock to me. So everybody has communicated in many ways on a more understanding basis, I think, is probably the answer that we would give, that I would give. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Scott, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I would agree that we've done a lot of communication both internally and externally with residents about parking enforcement, whether enforcement is being relaxed and for how long, but also just letting employees know that this isn't a normal time, that this is unique, that no one's experienced anything like this before. A lot of cities are going through furloughs. We're experiencing that to some extent here in Denver, and so just trying to communicate often, be there for everyone, answer questions, just be as supportive as we can so we can all get through this.
Thank you. Tobias, you're back. The question we are answering right now is, how will you manage the bounce back as lockdown measures are phased out, with a specific focus on mental health and also job losses? Is there something that you can add to this?
I think I can, while I'm looking at Joe Servants' face from Clever City, well, what I can add is that my focus on that is really what we're doing internally at the city, that we do a lot of virtual town hall meetings where our city manager engages our workforce to say, like, to make sure that we focus on our wellness and self-care and how we talk to employees. My division is fairly new, so I'm a very small division. All my stuff is in third-party contractors, so I'm engaging with them pretty much on a daily basis to do daily check-ins, which we're now reducing a little bit more to like twice or 3 times a week check-ins. But to just like, I think the importance is know that we need to be the leaders and we need to be the motivators, and we need to be realistic to really keep in mind that we don't know how we can interact virtually with everybody, but we don't know what's really going on if people don't want to share. We need to be extra careful to be have a lot of empathy for the situation and that how it's impacts. And I think what was really important for us, like from a city perspective, to try to communicate to everybody, being part of the streets or the transportation and mobility department and the streets and operation division, we are still out there. So we are still on the streets, we are still doing the work. And there's many other people that don't do the work. And so we need to keep that in mind, that we are fortunate to be in the positions that we are, and have empathy for others that might not be, I think.
And Benito, how are you intending to manage the bounce back?
I know up to this point, our DDOT leadership has been constantly keeping, the staff in the loop as much as we can. Leadership is, and us as managers have been engaging our staff. Even with my own team, we have a weekly check-in where we're not talking about purchase. It's important to check in. We've talked about the self-care. And I think someone else already brought it up. We have to be cognizant of, those in our own communities that are not as fortunate. We've been blessed with the mayor's team, which have recently just re-released a revised 2021 budget that tries to keep our core operations running without implementing furloughs. That has not been the case for other jurisdictions in the country. We've been blessed with that opportunity, and we try to continue to be out there. And the mayor also trying to create those opportunities across the government, especially with the contact tracing efforts right now.
Great, thank you.
Key is communication and transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things actually for everybody, especially me as a layperson. There have been quite a lot of mixed messages, I guess, for everybody, because nobody's sure about what's going on and things are changing day to day. So absolutely agree that the key is clear communication. So Tom, did you have anything to add on this point?
Yeah, communication is obviously huge, so which has already been mentioned. But what I could probably add to the conversation is the safety aspect for our staff and their mental health. Now, our parking enforcement officers and our tow lot staff are there in the mix of continual frustration from customers who don't like parking rules, they don't like regulations, they obviously don't like being towed. So making sure our staff knows they have our full support and providing them with all the tools to be able to best manage the service we expect, which is the highest level of customer service. And then one of the things we're thinking about right now that we've been discussing for several months is a program that would allow us to mail citations compared to historically, like most other cities probably, we place citations on windshields, right? And one of the things we started talking about a year ago, and now we're having serious discussions about this and may be able to implement by the time we go back to our regular night parking regulations, is for night regulations in particular, which are you're parked on the wrong side or you don't have a permit, which is required. We may go to a program whereby we would send all those citations out in the mail instead of place them on the windshield. And the value that that has is our staff is in harm's way. Unfortunately, we get about 1 report a week on average of what we call a safety-related incident, which goes anywhere from people yelling, throwing stuff at our vehicles. And about a year ago, one of our staff was stabbed in a vital organ. Thankfully, he survived. But we've got to take every proactive measure we can to ensure the safety of our staff. So we think this may be an ideal opportunity to roll this out and for it to be enhanced safety measure to protect our valuable staff.
Great, thank you. One of the questions actually that came up yesterday was, well, in relation to relaxing enforcement temporarily. There was a lot of bite back from the residents within those municipalities because obviously there was no enforcement. So people were parking wherever they felt like it. Did you relax enforcement temporarily during this time? And did you experience the same problem? Scott, you're nodding. Perhaps you could take it away.
Yeah, our enforcement will resume on June 1st, and so we've had relaxed enforcement, essentially no enforcement of the metered areas or the time-limited areas since the middle of March. And so, you know, a lot of blocks, a lot of vehicles haven't moved for weeks, you know, and you have businesses that need that turnover. So that's something that I think Tom has a good point about. This could be a good opportunity for us to think about having the ability to mail those citations also instead of serving the vehicles like most jurisdictions. And so we haven't discussed that, but that's a great point. So that's something I'll certainly bring to the team.
Great. And what's happening in DC, Will or Benito?
I defer my time to Benito.
So there's been clarifying guidance initially on the enforcement side. We were not doing rush hour restrictions. We were maintaining all other enforcement postures, keeping our meter on, and the meters are still on to this day, which we have, we have seen it was about 88% drop in revenue this past month in April. There's been some clarifying guidance since from our Department of Public Works, which is responsible for our parking enforcement, where they have prioritized enforcement on the meters and in residential areas, because as was noted, vehicles aren't moving as much. There is some activity here, but not as much as normal. So between the lower activity and also trying to minimize staff exposure, I wish I could speak a little more, but that's not under the jurisdiction of DDOT. But from what I understand from our colleagues, they've been trying to minimize their staff exposure, and from the staff that has been exposed, trying to reconfigure staffing operations to maintain critical services, particularly enforcement related to safety violations like via fire hydrant intersection.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have anything else to add on this point? Otherwise, we will move swiftly on to our next poll. Nope, no takers. Okay, let's run the next poll, please. So we have a statement here: adversity manifests character. We have the options of I agree, I disagree, I'm not sure. Any guesses, gents? Go on. Which one's the most popular?
I agree.
I don't see how it can't be I agree.
Okay, well, let's see. Our audience is still voting right now. Okay, let's see. It's pretty decisive. And let's have the results. And you are all perfectly correct. 67% vote I agree. So do any of you have any stories about character building during COVID-19?
I would say that I think Tobias or Scott said it when they were talking about, some people are still out there. They're still working. on the mental health aspect, and characters, those people who are working as hard remotely as they do when they're in the office, or those people that perform the same routine and follow the same process and rounds in their duties as the person who in the incident and outside of the incident. So, and I've seen just small driving around, seeing there's not many people in the streets, so you're going to see your own people. And I've seen plenty of our people, without being seen by me, performing the same routine, performing the same rounds, doing the same duty and the same service that they did before. And so that's my comment, that that there's character there.
Are there any positive stories from this period that you can share with us? Anyone? You must have seen something in your municipality that's been particularly nice. Everybody likes to hear something nice, and I think we need it more now than ever. So, Tom, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a variety of things, and I wrote this, so I couldn't be any more agreeable to this. I think this is a life lesson. It's certainly the case in COVID-19. It's a lesson in life that in times of adversity is that what builds and defines and manifests our character. It's how we react, it's how we help others, it's how we serve our communities, and it's how we serve the public. So we relaxed all the vast majority of our regulations, which are metered, are timed, and our night parking regulations on March 19th. And our mode was we went into utilizing our staff to provide a variety of other services. They helped with our election. We held an election in early April in Wisconsin, presidential primary. So we had 15 or 20 of our parking enforcement officers assist with that function. We had staff that helped out in our forestry section. That's one of our units within DPW operations here in Public Works. We had staff help out in our sanitation group. So we put our staff in a variety of places to perform ongoing essential services. And how wonderful is that to see, and how vital is that to serve a community that you utilize any and every resource you have. And kudos to our people that they are the ones on the front line who go out there and soldier on and do work in the midst of adversity and in a time where most people want to and are allowed and are supposed to stay home. But our staff showed up every day for work, went out and did what they were asked to do, and not only met expectations, but went beyond them. That's the definition of building character right there.
Thank you. Tobias, what happened in Oregon? Were there any nice examples there? Oh, I think you're muted at the moment. If you, oh, he knows. Okay, we will try and fix the technical issue with Tobias. We are live, so these things happen. Perhaps Benito, you could give us a couple of examples of what's happened in DC.
So I'm just going to go generally here. I think one thing I've noticed is, and I think I touched upon it briefly earlier on, about how peers coming together very quickly to share their experiences early on. When Seattle talked about their curbside pickup drop off, and they were talking about like the sign design, how much curbside space. So a lot of peer cities can replicate very quickly, and coming together, and also partnering with the private sector, nonprofits, to get the message out. We did a blog series that's part of the International Parking Mobility Institute over the last 5 weeks. Our last blog just went out today. Also cross-posted on Institute of Transportation Engineers for America, citing, urgency of the situation, what municipalities doing. I'm getting some sound somewhere. The issue at hand, municipal efforts happening around the country, what the private sector is doing, what academia is doing on the research side, and then how this all comes together to bring innovation. Because we're all not in silos, it's a partnership, between public, private, research, nonprofit to innovate and bring our communities together. So I'll leave it with that.
Thanks, Benito. Tobias, I think we're having quite a lot of background noise from you. I'm going to give it another go. If you could perhaps say something to us so we can hear how bad it is.
So right now I can control the control panel again, so that's good.
Okay, great.
So I think what was good for us here was that we have our leadership was from the beginning very much, okay, we need to make sure that we are a strong point of reference for our community. So they issued a lot of calm, they gave us like a lot of solid foundation. And what they also did is saying like, look, if your workload is limited right now because of the COVID-19 situation, like if you're in growth management or in other departments, go and serve your community. So we reached out to our nonprofit network. There were relationships that were made, and everybody who had a limited workload was able to volunteer for these organizations, assist as much as they can, doing that on their regular time to really show, look, we are here. And I think where we saw the reward of that is that people started randomly putting notes onto City Hall that said like, hey, thanks for everything you do and thanks for your service. And I think that's good. And I think we showed in our leadership teams so a lot of flexibility for everybody, meaning if you want to change your schedule, change your schedule. And I think people reacted to that very positive and like did all they can. And I think I can echo what Tom said. It's like people were still out there doing what they have to do. And although they had the option to say, I don't want to because I'm too scared, I can stay at home, but they did. And I think that speaks about loyalty and devotion to their job and to their leadership, and I think that's good.
Yeah, thank you, Tobias. And Scott, do you have anything nice to add from Denver?
Yeah, I think I've been just impressed in general just with how innovative and optimistic and positive people have been. Our meter techs and our meter collectors, some of them were redeployed about a month ago, and most of them worked, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. and they were reassigned serving food and helping out at a detention center where their risk of exposure, you could argue, was higher. But they did it, and it was, scheduled unlike anything they've ever worked before. They were working 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. It was so different, but they did it, and a month went by, and they did it, had a positive attitude the whole time, and now we're getting ready to gear back up and turn our meters on. So yeah, just impressed with how optimistic and positive folks have been through all of this. It's been great to see.
Absolutely, it has been heartening to see nice cases, and certainly nice for everybody in our audience to hear today. I think it's very important. We have a couple more polls, so we are going to move swiftly on to the next one, which is a set of questions here. So they are all about recovery strategy and future planning. The first option we have is, have you started to look at a recovery strategy? The second option is, what are you prioritizing at the moment? The third is, how are you managing the increase in demand for parking? And the fourth, contingency plan. Do you have a contingency plan in the event of lockdown being reinforced? So let's give our audience a few seconds and then we can see the results of this poll. Okay, this one is absolutely very decisive. So if we can move on to the results, that would be great. So we have, what are you prioritizing at the moment as 50%? So Will, perhaps you could let us know what you're prioritizing at this moment in time.
But mostly education of our staff, how to, as the previous question, we talked about the previous question, making sure our staff is sort of, that we continue to engage with our staff. It's a lot of planning, mostly surrounding, the normal things, sanitization, social distancing, PPE, employee relations. That's the priority right now, to plan each type of location we have, what we need in this new environment, how it needs to operate, how to keep everybody safe. So that's the priority at the moment. It's really planning for an increased amount of operations.
And Benito, is it the same on your side in the same city?
So indeed, we're trying to support the mayor's priorities, try to keep our cases down, try to support economic revitalization through efforts that we can, in this case, curbside reprogramming to facilitate outdoor dining. Another thing, going back to about our team, is we're usually either customer oriented or out in the field kind of work. So it's been quite an adjustment working remotely and trying to move us towards a telework enabled, and what will that also look like in delivering customer service. So it's, I guess our priorities is, again, trying to support the mayor's efforts on reopening the district, especially with reopening on Friday. And it will be a phased approach, and hopefully we move in the positive direction, and we want to support the mayor's efforts and our public to do that.
Thank you. I can see you nodding, Tom. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, so safety related citation issuance and compliance is primarily what we've been doing for the last 6 weeks. And then right now, what we're spending most of our time doing is planning for safety enhancements. So doing hazard assessments of our facilities to make sure when we bring our staff back, and or in particular when the public starts coming back to those facilities, that all the appropriate safety measures are in place, including hand sanitizer, social distancing signs, anything and everything, so that the public sees and understands that our interest is safety. And then a phased approach to lifting our currently suspended regulations. And probably most importantly, that we spent some time on earlier, is the communication of those. Because, I think parking and traveling is habitual, right? So people get used to patterns. And now almost everybody in our city is out of any pattern related to any kind of regulation other than safety. So now we have to spend a lot of time and effort to communicate the importance of compliance, why these regulations are important, that they're intended to protect safety, to promote turnover and access, to ensure safe, clean streets, and to ensure access and turnover. So all of those things, basically, we kind of got to start over because we've had almost 2+ months of everybody just being asked and almost required to stay home and to say, just leave your car on the street for 2-3 months and forget about it. And that our regular streets can't work like that. And we cannot accomplish all our intended safety objectives and cleaning and turnover and access objectives with that kind of approach. So now we really have to spend our thoughts, times, and efforts on everything we need to do to communicate the importance of that to the public.
Great, thank you. Scott, do you have something to add here?
Yeah, so I think in addition to what's already been said, I think one thing I can mention is that we've been working a lot on how to bring employees back to the building. So, transit service here in Denver is going to be reduced at least through October, I believe. And so a lot of people rely on that when getting to work. So if we're asking them to come back to work and we're asking them to take some furlough days, or we're going to ask them to pay for parking, how can we accommodate them? How can we make it easier for them to come back to work when that time comes? Especially if some folks get to work from home still, can we use our parking facilities differently? Can we provide free or discounted parking to the people that used to rely on transit? So just how to bring people back to the building while minimizing, the financial strain that could cause if they were used to taking transit. Now that's being reduced. So just, thinking through that quite a bit these days.
Yeah, perfect. And Tobias, do you have anything to add here? Okay. Yep. Let's have a
Melissa,
look. Yes.
I was going to, question two, the second question was, do we think more, how are you managing the increase in vehicles requiring parking? That was number two in the poll. And I'm curious
It was.
if my colleagues have an answer to that. Do they see increases in vehicles coming downtown? I mean, common sense would say there might be. And if there's any projections or any data that they're dealing with that would show, or if it's just a guess.
We don't have any data. Go ahead, Benito.
I was going to jump in as your counterpart. I would say a question about what are we prioritizing. I think I also forgot to mention that is also a concern for us here. At least in whether at the blog or in the Washington Post, there's people that are concerned about returning back to public transportation, and being the third busiest, not the second busiest transit system in the country. Then on top of that, the worst traffic congestion in the country. We outdid LA 2 years ago. All this pre-COVID, and we had a wake-up call. I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, William, like 2016, 2017, when the entire Metro rail system was shut down due to safety.
Yeah, it was about a 2-week or 10-day disruption, leading to continued disruptions, where today even there's the yellow, orange line and silver line are completely closed.
So we had an initial, I guess, wake-up call back then when we shut down our entire rail system, and that was pre-pandemic. Now you have this pandemic thought process of, is it safe to return to public transportation? So I think part of it's going to be strategy on our public transportation colleagues at WMATA, and for us DC Circulator and Streetcar to bring people back. But what can we do on curbside to encourage, to further reinforce the thought process on using public transportation or looking at off-street accommodations? Because especially as we start expanding more towards expanded our streets and parking lanes for curbside retail or dining, those opportunities for historically vehicle storage are going to have to be readjusted. As Tom noted earlier about these historical patterns are going to have to be adjusted. So to answer your question, William, it is a concern for us here at DDOT. I don't have any more specifics right now other than it is a major concern for us to keep an eye on. And we're working also not here at DDOT, but also with our peers in Metro DC, that's Arlington, Alexandria, Montgomery, and Prince George's. So we actually have a regional curbside roundtable to talk about some of these issues. And I'll talk to you offline. There's an event next month about that. But what does it look like across Metro DC?
Yeah.
Sorry, Scott.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was just going to say, we don't have any data here, but something we've talked quite a bit about is what do things look like from a transportation standpoint? Is there, here in Denver, we were contemplating and to some extent preparing for meter rate increase, and that seems unlikely now with the economic circumstances that we'll find ourselves in. And just thinking about that, if folks aren't taking transit, there's more parking demand for downtown, but then some people are working from home. Will there be an increase in VMT? And just, I don't know, curious to see what October, November looks like. We can get through the summer.
Great, thank you. And a valid question indeed, William. Tobias, can we very quickly hear from you about what the priority will be?
Okay, so now I could unmute myself. It seems to always mute me again. So priorities, like real quick, like our priorities are really to how can we assist our businesses to reopen. And the second part of where the conversation continued to go is we were at about 96% of utilization before COVID-19 of our downtown system. And to give you the context of that, that is off season. And during the season here in Central Oregon, we see usually an increase of up to 20, 25,000 visitors per day that make our demand go through the roof, which we are now back to about 60, 70% last week. We went down to zero, pretty much, after we had no more permits, no more businesses open, and now we're already at 60 and 70%, and we don't have visitors back. So I think for us, the biggest priority is how do we actually manage that? What are our opportunities to be prepared for an open street measure? Because if we would close 2 of our main streets, we are losing another 400 spaces. Everybody here knows, well, very easy math. If I'm already at 70%, I'm going to be just like out of parking. But equally on the other side, how do you phase in enforcement again, which is limited to safety measures only? How do you phase that back in if you're already seeing the increase in demand? How much of that demand and the data to get, like what Scott said, is very difficult right now, because how much of that demand is based by employees of the businesses that usually park in off-street locations or in the garage or over here. And so I think that like our priority is to like do our best guess of what's going to be next and when is it going back to normal. And that's difficult. Revenue projections are fairly difficult to do if you don't really know what's actually going to happen.
Yep, valid point. Thank you, Tobias, and it's great that we can hear you now. So let's move on quickly to our next and final poll. So this will be coming up in just one moment. And we have a statement here. Projected shifts in consumer behavior are driving rapid changes in our business. I think this is something that we touched on earlier as well. Gentlemen, do you have any guesses as to what the answer may be from the audience in so far as I agree, I disagree, or I am not sure?
Agree.
Agree? Okay. Let's have a look. Let's see the results here. Well, that was indeed very decisive, 91%. So, Tobias, would you like to kick us off with this one?
Yeah, I think it's definitely driving changes. And I think it's a little bit in the beginning was kind of all over the place. And it went in my environment, it went for like, well, nobody will go anywhere anymore. We won't need any parking, to me having to do a lot of education to say, so if you look at changes in consumer behavior, and if you look at the numbers and the conversations that we can hear in other markets that are already coming back, like overseas in Europe and China, now kind of the opposite is true. So now is the time to prepare for those changes. So I think it's definitely driving some changes. And I think for us, like we look at micromobility, which kind of like was put on hold as an option to like actually be prepared to roll it out if we have to. And so I think I can echo that there's definitely changes that are happening. And if for us here in Central Oregon, we already are a tourist destination. And if the travel behaviors that people talk about come to place, we already are getting a lot of people. People come here with cars. If that changes, that more people drive separate, we have a kind of like have a little bit of a challenge there, I think. But that's why we're here, to find a way to get through that.
Thanks, Tobias. Scott, do you have something to add here?
Yeah, so one thing I'm curious about in terms of consumer behaviors, how will that impact the way we manage and program the curb lane and the curbside? So for example, if you have a restaurant that no longer needs valet, what can that space be used for? Do we need more pickup and drop off locations, or pick up and deliver? Do we need to be more supportive of those activities? And so just how our curb lane strategies will evolve based on consumer behavior, especially around restaurants, I think. So that's something that we're thinking quite a bit about and preparing for as well.
And Tom, what's happening on your side?
Yeah, I think consumer behavior has dictated a lot of shifts over the last few years and will continue to do so. In particular, mobile payment options, remote payment options are going to become more and more important to people for their own safety. That's been something that's been rapidly deployed and used in the 5+ years since we rolled out our own remote parking payment app in Milwaukee. And as we lift our regulations, we expect that that's even going to grow incrementally, if not exponentially, because the customer really wants to be safe and comfortable. They're coming back to an environment where there's a lot of uncertainties, so they want the certainty of what they're using to be safe. So they're going to choose those options that are going to be safe. And so I think remote parking payment, not only for parking, but transportation apps, micromobility apps that allow transit payments of all kinds and shapes and forms, are really what people have long wanted and asked for. And that's going to become much more the case as we come out of this and we get into a recovery stage.
Thanks. And Benito, do you agree with our audience today?
Oh, yes. I think DC has been at the front of a lot of these projected changes and, welcoming a lot of new mobility options over the last decade. We had car sharing come in the district in 2004 or 5 on street. And then, of course, stockless bikes and scooters in the early part of this decade. We even have moped sharing on top of that. But then also you have the rise of what we call for-hire vehicles, but the industry calls transportation network companies. Then you got the on-demand delivery. So our curbside has gotten very complex very fast because of these various mobility options moving people and goods. And COVID-19 has probably sped up the process at this point as for that need to access the curb. So, for us now, it's the mayor a couple of years back, I think it was 2016, where she made a statement de-emphasizing vehicle storage. That is the last priority here in the district at this point on our streets. And we're trying to move more and more of our curbside, to retrofit more safety improvements for Vision Zero, also facilitate, more movement of people and goods. But then the issue comes into play with these we moved past the point of dedicating, repurposing curb for, use A, use B. We realize we only have so much curb to work with here in DC. So we have to think about not, the specific mode, but like what's the activity going on. So in 2017, we came out with the pickup drop-off zones. It's really repurposing an existing idea, but dedicating that curbside that historically would have been a loading zone on one end, on the other end would have been a taxi zone. Why aren't both curb uses the same? Because you're basically picking up or dropping off either a person or goods. So we're trying to figure out with our limited curbside, can we start to pair off similar curbside activities so we can maximize with what we got. And then once you're there, then how are you going to manage that activity? Because, at some future, we're going to be away from the concept of vehicle storage and parking and talking about curbside access with connected autonomous vehicles. So how are you going to regulate and manage that access to the curb? So that's where, I alluded to earlier, where we're trying to figure out how you're going to monetize that access. And then I'm sure, William, I'm sure you'll be able to chime in. I don't know your thoughts, because a concern for us, especially since I opened Pandora's box about connected autonomous vehicles, is where do these vehicles go? We don't want the zombie vehicles on our streets at some point. They have to go somewhere, and that may be something where the private sector has a chance to chime in and how they can get involved. So I'll stop there.
I should proceed.
William, let's give you the last word to you just before we move on to the open floor Q&A.
I would say that everything Benito just said is actually happening, and then some. I'm sure everybody's had this, has seen this mobility sort of revolution occur. All of these things have been changing. These are shifts in consumer behavior and have been driving changes in our business for the last number of years. COVID-19, of course, I think is changing some of this. I think for a period of time, shared vehicle use will have somewhat of a downturn. I think there'll be some Uber itself, Lyft itself, there's been some downturn. Everything from carpooling to transit usage, I think will suffer somewhat during this period. But then I think we'll all come back, and the trajectory that we've all been on will return. And so if you're in managing parking spaces and managing that sort of business, I think you need to continue to pay attention to this, because COVID-19 will be a dip. Benito, I'd love to talk about where these cars are going to go. I don't know where they're going to go. I think, for all I know, everybody thinks they're going to circulate, but we can of course start with like trying to get the Ubers to stop in particular areas so that they don't hose up all of the traffic on the entire street. But it is certainly a puzzle, and one that I think will continue. Short term, yes, COVID-19 will take over, as it has all of our lives over the next 9 months to a year, and we will shift our behavior, and we'll all be working on a lot of projects that really relate to COVID now. But I do believe that all the forces we've seen, the trend line we've seen in mobility in the cities will return. That trend line we'll get back on that trend line before long. Melissa.
Perfect. Thanks, Will. Okay, we are going to move over to our open floor Q&A. We do have had some questions already coming in from our audience. I am going to defer now to Steph, so I will hand over to him and I will turn my webcam off. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll see each other in person in the future. Take care.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yes, thanks so much, gentlemen. Let's see. There are some questions that rolled in during the discussion. So to our audience, if you have anything to ask these gentlemen, feel free. This is the moment to do so. One of the questions that rolled in: are any of you considering opening on-street parking payment to multiple apps to increase the number of touchless transactions?
I guess I'll chime in. Well, this precedes COVID, but I know we've been working on, so we have one of the highest pay by cell penetration rates in the country. We're, I think last check, 57% of our parking revenues coming from pay by cell and growing. And I think the transaction activities are just if it hasn't already broken 50%, just right there at 50%. But right now, for the last few years, we only have one provider. I know going forward, we're trying to expand to allow multi-operability, sorry for the mispronunciation, so that the eventuality customer coming into Metro DC, being one of the major tourist destinations in the country, and to have the ability to be interoperable with possibly their home jurisdictions, pay by cell operator, or maybe even whatever's going on in the private sector. So we're working to move in the direction to create more options and opportunities. But one thing we are keeping an eye on is how we're going to deal with our bankless population. And we're moving away from just parking payment, is more in the direction what we're calling the mobility wallet, or towards mobility payment. So you can do the same through multiple providers, be able to pay for parking, for transit, for bike share. So in the hope that we can expose more of the public towards more transportation opportunities, more than just the car in the district. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else feels like responding to this? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. Tobias, just raise your hand and I'll unmute your microphone if you have something to say, because I'm sorry, but the background noise is a bit too much. No raised hands with you. All right, let's move on to the. Oh, yeah, sure, Tom.
Hey, Seth. Yeah, so I think that is something that a lot of cities will look at in the future. We've had one very successful vendor for 5+ years. And that vendor we are collaboratively working with them to integrate more of a transportation approach, which will be incredibly valuable to promote the access and the mobility we desire to show the public that we're all about and what we emphasize in the city. So the challenge for us is it's not so much just about parking apps that provide payment. This is about reliable mobility options that speak to the customer and tell the story of what you're trying to accomplish. And that takes time, quite frankly. It takes time to build that rapport with that customer base, to use that customer base, and that is what we have now. And now we're building upon that. Now, once you get that figured out, which we're close to, then you can start to explore other options. Think about how you might expand that, because certainly there are plenty of other alternatives and options out there in the industry, but you want to mirror what your goals and initiatives are to what those services can provide. And to build that foundation is critical, because that's what we're going to expect the next vendor to do who wants to come and deliver that type of service for our city.
All right, great, thanks. Anyone else want to comment on this? Let's move on to the next question. So how do you plan to do curbside enforcement of the restaurant pickup loading zone after this pandemic? So how can you make sure that people don't park overtime? First come, first serve, guys. Yes, Tobias.
So I think that's a really good question, because I think right now with all the east enforcement, it's a little bit more like, okay, let's hope whoever parks there really goes there for the restaurant. But and after that, I think, well, it goes with the other question before too. This is a great opportunity for technology too, right? I guess we look into like, how do we automate more things? Is there a way to find solutions that can measure those? Is the money there, right? Like if you have a sensor there that can measure that, you can have enforcement stand by. If you're going like, I think Scott mentioned that, no, maybe Tom, about like not issuing the citation on the windshield, but actually mailing it. Can you automate that solution to say, to time it? If somebody is in a 15-minute spot or 20-minute spot longer than that, the citation gets automated, because you can't place a buddy next to it 24/7 and to observe it. But I think that what we have done, and which is kind of like in support of this question, is that because we eased enforcement over here, it was important for us to make sure that our third-party contractor can maintain their workforce as long as possible. So we shifted, right? We shifted the schedule, shifted that. So as long as we have limitations in other areas as related to enforcement, we can monitor more of the curbside pickup zones in our end at least, which I think will be through that we are able to enforce it.
Steph?
Right. Yeah. Sure.
I would just add that in the last 3 weeks, actually, we've been hired to manage restaurant pickup and drop-off zones in a very forward-thinking retailer, retail shopping center owner, who wanted us to provide an extra service. And my prediction would be that we probably don't do this service as with labor long term, but maybe this feature stays, because I think it's been well received by many consumers, and it is a very efficient use of curb space versus allowing somebody to park there for a longer period of time. It encourages turnover. So we've actually been hired and are being paid, and our staff is being paid to actually perform this enforcement service in near real time. So I just thought that was interesting to mention.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, Benito.
So the restaurant Pudo question actually So we had an infrastructure kind of in place before this, because I noted earlier how, we've had our pickup drop-off zones since October 2017. I'm happy to share some of our work we published for the Transportation Research Board this past year. But as it pertains to the enforcement side of things, it was an initial challenge. What is constituting parking? And we've come to how we're communicating to the public. If you're long enough to get a parking ticket, you've parked too long. Because it's hard to, an issue for parking enforcement is, how do you properly time, and you have to cover a lot of ground as well, unless you have a dedicated officer at the pickup drop-off zone. When we started, we only had one on Connecticut Avenue and M Street Northwest, south of DuPont Circle. Now we're almost at 30. We can't have 30 dedicated officers being there 24/7. It's just not going to happen. So at this point, depending on time of day, depending on the demand, we've supplemented enforcement with towing capabilities, especially like Connecticut Avenue, U Street, and 14th for our nightlife areas. Some other locations is during our rush hour, particularly. And also in the last year, we've increased our fines. Usually the applicable fine here was a $35 ticket, but a customer would make the argument, well, it's cheaper than parking in one of the, in a parking garage. Like, no, that's not what we want you to do. If you want to park, you should go off street. So we have increased the collateral to $75, and also so that's what we've done there in the hopes to deter some of the activity, and we started to see a better compliance sense. And we've applied that same logic for the restaurant pudos during this COVID crisis.
All right. Anyone wants to respond to that? Scott, were you raising your hand? Will?
I was just going to add very quickly that I've seen a bollard, a bollard with a digital timer. It's a French product, and you put it by the street, and a car pulls in, and it just starts a shot clock, and it works on the concept of public shaming. And there's no officer involved. It's just somebody walks by, it's blinking red. And so I ran across this at an Intertraffic a couple of years ago. That was very interesting, which could be used in this application. I'm sure it's very expensive though.
Have you seen it somewhere yet? Or
I've not seen it in application, but I've seen it. It was presented at the RAI in Amsterdam, and it was they're using it in somewhere in France. I don't know.
May I interrupt? It is installed at Frankfurt Airport. This is Jorrit Weerman, the colleague of Steph. But it's already installed at an airport for the Kiss and Goodbye, Kiss and Bye song. So that's the reason. Sorry for interrupting.
I think that technology is also integrated at the parking meters at the train terminal in Vancouver, British Columbia, if I'm not mistaken. That you overstay, and the parking meter has already also issued you a parking ticket on top of that.
I just found out that it's also installed in the village I live in, but I haven't seen it yet. But it's good to find that out. I'm checking the clock, gentlemen. I see that it's time to round off, and I'm going to do that by starting to thank all of you for an opportunity to have you on this panel. Also for connecting us to all your colleagues and peers, and yeah, I hope the audience learned from this. And it's time to end a long event. So, gentlemen, each one of you, thank you so much from all our team for being here, for sharing all your insights, for sharing your information. Even though we had some small technical difficulties, Tobias, but I'm very happy that you were able to join. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
And you. Thank you.
Bye.